Hi everyone, welcome to this new webinar. Today's webinar is about how to set up your database, basically to put all the different parameters into your database correctly. So we'll be focusing on two different tabs in Geotic, mainly the library and secondly the user rights. So Geotic has for mission to keep the integrity of the data, but also it permits to limit the number of codes used by the geologist so that you can homogenize your logs. Okay, so today we're going to be focusing on this mainly. It's a long webinar. There's a lot of things to cover, but it's fairly easy. Okay, so there's nothing too complex today on this webinar. Just little tricks here and there. Okay, so let's start right away by the dictionaries. I'm gonna go back and forth between the different tabs you'll see, but we'll cover quite a bit of ground. Okay, so in the library today, we're going to be talking about the geology part in here, the survey part. I will not talk about sampling because this will be covered in another webinar in the future. And I'm not going to be I will be talking about other here, but not about the coordinate systems as I already did in a previous webinar. Okay, so I suggest you can go and watch this webinar if you have trouble with your coordinate systems. Okay, let's start with the Lithology tab. So I'm going to go through all of these. You'll see a lot of them are similar, so it's not too difficult. So the Lithology tab, just as a brief introduction, by default Geotic comes with codes and in there. So these codes comes from the Quebec Ministry, what they are using for the field work and things like this. Okay, so you're more than welcome to delete all of them and start from scratch if you want to. There's absolutely no problem with this. So if you want to delete or modify something, you can just delete all of them, and it's going to ask you, do you want to delete these entries? And you say no or yes, and so on. Okay, so you can change the abbreviation, the codes for them, and so on. Okay. Just before starting, I'm talking about all those dictionaries. A lot of people think that these dictionaries are just if you're using the preset tables of Geotic. So basically these tables. But actually, if you're doing your personalized table, you can also use a dictionary. I suggest you watch the other webinar about personalized tables. You'll see that one of the column type that you can use is also a dictionary. So you can actually use those dictionaries to build your personalized tables also. So it's not just for preset tables, but it can be used elsewhere. Okay, so let's go back to Lithology. So in Lithology, in here you see three different columns. So you have the name, the rock name, the abbreviation, and then the last column, which is not as known, is the standard description. Okay, so let's just do, okay, I'm just going to call it fake rock, for example, and the code is going to be FR. And I'm going to write a description, a standard description. So basically a standard description is a description that you're always writing for this type of rock. So instead of having to write it every single time, you can just do it once. And then when you do your description, you can press Ctrl+1 or do a right click, and then you can have the standard description directly up to you. Okay, so fake rock with, I don't know, I'm just doing something with percent biotite. This is just an example. Just a test or something. Okay, so let's say that you have a whole paragraph that you want to always write. You can just write it down in here. Okay, so the reason why I've put it stars is just I know these are fields I need to correct in my description, so I don't have to retype the whole description. I can just go and modify those little stars when I'm doing this. Okay, also these codes are in a certain order, so you can actually move this fake rock. I don't know, maybe you want this fake rock to be just before rock, for example. Okay, so it's possible to change the order of the pick list that you'll get into your tables. And finally, what you see in here is if I modify this, you can also assign a color code to this dictionary. Okay, so in this case, these color codes need to be defined in the color codes that we will see a little bit later today. You can also press on edit and it's going to bring you directly to the color code manager. But if you have one, you can just select one. I'll show you right away how this is used. Okay, I'm just going to do save. I'm going to close this, go to the description part. So if I'm doing a new lithology in here, let's say that I'm doing from 85 to 95, that's fine. And I go and select my fake rock, which was just before rock. This is how I positioned it before. And I don't know, it has 25-degree angle. So I'm just going to put fake rock 25-degree and so on. Okay. And here in the description, instead of having to write my description, because I have a standard description, I could press Ctrl+1, or I can do right-click and click lithology in here. So what the standard text will show directly in here, and then I can just say, okay, in this case, I have 15% biotite, let's say, and then you say save, and that's it. Okay, so this is how it is used. So I told you that we can also assign a color code. Well, the color code that is associated with it is for this preview. Okay, so basically in the color code, if it recognized this summary FR, it would just color it the proper color. Okay, so in this case, there's absolutely no color because this code is not in my color code. Okay, so, but basically the link that you have in here is just to do the preview, okay, to give some colors to your preview. Okay, so you'll see this in many dictionaries in here. Okay, so it's not more difficult than this. Other things that you need to consider is that you can export to different databases. So once you have your color codes all set up, not color code, but you have your lithology codes all set up, you can export it to another database and so on. Okay, so it's quite practical. Also, all of these dictionaries that are in this corner, in the geology part in here, are for description. The ones in survey are for information tables. Okay, just a quick tip. All right, texture, structure, very similar. You have also a color code. You have a standard description and so on. So you have name, abbreviation. I'm not going to go through this. It's the same. Okay, so texture, structure is in the lithology. Lithology part in here. So you have these codes in here. Okay. Continuing, alteration. Alteration is exactly the same, except that there's a few more options in here. So if I'm doing modify, here you see use a list for the degree. So what they mean by degree is the intensity. Okay, so you can use a personalized list for intensity. If you don't have one, you can press edit and then you can create a personalized list. We'll see the personalized list a little bit later. They're right in here. So you can use this. If you uncheck this, you'll have to enter something manually for your intensity. Okay, so that's not a problem. Again, you have your color codes, but you have another options here that is lithology or alteration. It's the case for alteration in secondary structure. You can have your own table for alteration or include it into the lithology table. So if I put lithology, for example, you'll see right away, you have an extra tab that appeared here for alteration. Okay, but if I was going to select alteration in here, it would go into a different tab, which is called alteration, and it's a completely separate table. Okay, so that's the difference. Also, secondary structure, exactly the same thing. You have a list for the degree. You have also, do you want to put it in lithology or its own table? So I'm not going to go through this. It's exactly the same thing. Same thing with standard description and so on. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Mineralization, exactly the same thing as the lithology tab. Dictionaries, so you have the name, abbreviation, standard description, and that's pretty much it. You can move around your little things there to put the most common one at first if you want to, and things like this. Okay, so far so good. It's fairly simple, but now we get into the vein table. Okay, I'm just going to show quickly the vein table so that you understand better what's going on. So the preset vein table in Geotic works in a different way. Okay, so you have a vein type here, and depending on the vein type that you're using, the second row here changes. Okay, so for example, if I'm taking stockwork, now it's in percentage. If I'm taking vein, it's in thickness. Okay, so it's a width, and so on. Okay, so this is what we're going to be defining into your vein type. So in vein type, you have the different name. Okay, I'm just going to add another one. Okay, TST for test. And then you can say which type of vein type it is. Is it a percentage? Do you want to have a thickness, an angle, or an abundance? And abundance is the number of vein you will find in the interval, for example. If I choose a thickness, well, I'll have to specify what are the units of that I'm going to be using for this. Okay, percentage, I don't need to specify anything, but so this is how it works. Okay, so you can have different vein types with different units if you want to, different types. Okay, so if you see here, stockworks are percentage, veins are centimeter in this database, and so on. Okay, so so you can do this also. Now you have the vein structure, just showing you again. So you have the gang structure and minerals in here. So we're going to be defining these pick lists in here. Okay, vein structure, very, very simple. You have the name and abbreviation, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so you can assign the color codes if you want to, but that's pretty much it. The gang mineral, exactly the same. So name, abbreviation, and that's it. Okay. As for the minerals in here, well, this is the same tab as the mineralization tab that you have in here. Okay, so that's not a real problem. All right, so moving on to the oriented structure table. This one is slightly different. So in this case, you have the name, abbreviation, standard description as usual, but you will have to put also a color, a pattern, and a symbol. Okay, so this is used mostly in the stereo-nets in GeoticLog. So if you want to represent the different structure in different color, different symbols in your stereo-nets, this is how you define it. Okay, so this is how it is. Okay, so same kind of idea. You click on it, and then you just assign a color, pattern, symbol, and that's it. As for geophysics, okay, geophysics is kind of a tricky one. Well, actually, it's very simple. I suggest if you're not using the geophysics table in Geotic, this table, if you're not already using it, I would suggest not to use it and just create your own personalized table. This was created at the very beginning of Geotic, and now we continue to support it, but there's really no point to this table anymore. So I would suggest to create your own personalized table for your geophysical data. You will have a lot more options than this one. But if you do have, if you're using this tab, just know that these titles of columns, okay, are modified in here in Geophysics. Okay, so this is just the name of the columns that you're using in Geophysics. All right. All right, moving on. Okay, so this was for the description tabs, the different tables that you have in your description tabs. Now, if we're moving in here in the information or project tab, so you have attribute, coordinates, information, downhole survey, photos. These, all the pick lists and things that you find in here are found into this square survey. Okay, so for example, in the survey, you can have your core size. So you can have BQ, HQ, NQ. So you just enter all your core size that you have in here. It could be RC or something like this. Okay, so this is what you will find in here in core size. Okay, so this is the list I find in here. Also, claim title, exactly the same. You just write down the list of all your claims that you have. So you can assign your survey to your claims. So when you're doing your final reports, or if you have to submit something to the government, you can, say in which claim all the work was done, and so on. Okay, in this case, I only have one claim, but in reality, most projects have more than one claim, so that's how it is. Township, exactly the same. You just write down the name of all your townships, and so on. I'm going to come back to optional fields in a minute. Okay. Attribute, a lot of people are not using the attribute table, and I'm not too sure why, because this is very useful, actually. Okay, so the attribute are time-related tables that are actually the journal of what happened with the drill hole or the survey. Okay, so was it, okay, for example here, was it drilled? Is it finished drilling? Is it inspected? Or is it moving right now? Did you had any mechanical breakdown? Is it surveyed? And things like this, and what date everything was done. Okay, so this is kind of useful, especially if you have a team that is on rotation and they want to know what happened with a drill hole, and everything is kept directly in the database, so you're not losing that information for later on. So the survey attributes are all created in here. Okay, so you have the name, you have color, and symbols. Okay, these survey attributes are also used in Geotic Graph and Geotic Mine. Okay, so to display or to trace your drill hole, especially when they're in plan mode, not in drilling mode, but in plan mode, you can use those color codes. It's going to check for the latest date in your attribute and will color it the right way. So that's why you have this column called Geotic Graph at the end here. So do you want to use these codes in Geotic Graph or not to display your drill hole, these colors or not? Okay, this doesn't apply in Geotic Mine, because in Geotic Mine you also have some filters that you can use and things like this. But just know that the attributes are quite useful, and I suggest you use them. Okay, and then you can create your own attributes if you have special needs or for your project and things like this. Okay, so you can just move around with here. Moving down to downhole survey. Downhole survey, these are all the apparatus that are used for your downhole surveys. So you can add another one. For example, I have single shot. I could have had multi-shots and things like this. And there's a column for azimuth. For example, when you're doing acid tests, it's impossible to get an azimuth. You only get a dip. So in this case, I've unchecked the azimuth thing there. So if I go back in here into downhole survey, you'll see if it's an acid test, it's not asking for an azimuth. It's just asking for a dip. But if I'm changing for, I don't know, a reflex, it's going to be azimuth and dip that are asked. Okay, so this is how it is defined. Photo groups. In Geotic, when you enter your photos, you can not have overlaps of photos. So that's why photo groups exist. So if you're taking dry core photo and wet core photo and you're doing close-up of part of the core and things like this, you will have to put them in different groups of photos. Okay, so that's how it is set up. These are just the groups. So just to show you quickly in here in photo, nope, I'm not going to change this. In here it says which photo group it is. This is the spic list that I'm talking about. Okay, optional fields. Optional fields. Okay, what to say about optional fields? These are in the information table in optional in here. Okay, in this database, I don't have any optional fields. Again, this is something that was created at the very beginning of Geotic, and now we still support it. But I would suggest that you create your own personalized information table instead of using the optional field if you don't have one already. Okay, the reason is you have a lot more flexibility with those personalized tables now than this. Okay, because if I'm going in the dictionary for optional fields, you'll see I can create 7 different text fields in here. Okay, so if I just do save, so you see I can add different things in here, but one thing that you need to keep in mind is you cannot have drop-down lists in your optional fields if you're using these ones. Okay, so you can have 2 fields with dates, 3 fields with check marks, and so on. And if you want it to be visible, you'll have to give it a name in French, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So then when the software changes language, it translates it into different language. Obviously, if you're not using Spanish and Portuguese, you can just write the same thing in English. It doesn't matter. The same name as in English. But it's kind of restrictive. I personally prefer to have a personal table of information than using the optional fields. It just gives you a lot more flexibility to do what you want. Okay. I'm just telling you. All right, moving down. Okay, so this is for survey. You have also all the others, the color codes. For example, you have the text color code. There's quite a bit of information to give to you in here. So you can create a new color code if you want to. Let's call it test, for example. And then you can define what is the default color. So basically when in the summary I don't see this text, which color is it going to be colored? Okay, so you can actually put it invisible. So if it doesn't see this code, maybe you just don't want to display it at all, and then you can just put invisible in here. Okay, and then you can add your different filter is the name, and then the legend is your summary, basically. Okay, I'm just going to take one that already exists just for the sake of saving time in here. So for example, this is an alteration color code. Okay, so I have serpentine, anchorite, chloride, silice, carbonate, and so on. Okay, so to create your color codes, you can also use dictionaries that are already defined. Okay, so since we've defined the dictionaries before, you can just select from the list of the dictionary and say, okay, let's say I want to add oxide. So you can just right click on this and add to code. So automatically it's going to give you the summary and the full name of it, and then you can just assign a color code to oxide. Let's put it red. Okay, and then you do save. You can also add a pattern to it if you want to. Okay. You'll notice that a lot of these codes now have stars. Okay, so these are wildcards. Okay, so basically in this case, it says, okay, everything that's start with SER, I want to display it with green. Okay, everything that's start with ANK, I want to display it as brown, and so on. In this case, I have star, sil, star. That means everything that contains SIL into it, put it this color. In the one I just added, there's no star, so it will have to match exactly this name to be able to be displayed. Okay, I'm just going to remind you, if you do alteration using the preset tables in Geotic, you'll end up with a summary that has several codes in it. So for example, SIL plus minus, API minus, depending on what you've used for your pick list for the intensity and things like this. But this is one code. So if I want to have a specific color for SIL plus minus, semicolon AP minus, I'll have to give it a color code. But in this case, because I have a code that is star, sil, star, it will recognize this code and put it the right color. Okay, so just be careful with this. It is quite important, those little stars there, the wildcards that you're using in here. Okay. Also, the order in which they appear are also important, because if I had another code, okay, let's modify, oh no, let's just add another one. Let's say I had another code that is called silly, and nation, okay, and I want this to be, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, this color, okay. In this case, okay, I'm just going to delete this one for now. Okay, silly is at the end of my list in here. And so actually I will never see this color because the order is important. So Geotic, when it colors the preview or different things, it will also always go into this order. So it will look for SER star, ANK star, CHL star, and then star sil star. So everything that contains SIL into it will be this color. So even though I have silly this color, because this is before and sil is contained within this, it will also be colored this way. So if I want my silly to be colored and the rest of everything that called sil to be this color, I'm just going to put this before sil. So it's going to be looking at silly. Oh, I see a silly, it's going to be this color. If not, if I see just sil, then it's going to be this color. So the order is quite important in here. Okay, I'm just phasing this because it is quite important. Also, you can import to GeoticLog and GeoticGraph to your profile in GeoticGraph. Also, you can import, export from different platform. Okay. Okay, so that's for the color codes. So you can use those color codes, like I said, in the dictionaries. It can be used again in Geotic Mind, for example, and other places, but it's quite useful. Let's go to color numbers. So these are ranges. Okay, so you have to give like from this to this. In this case, you won't have any dictionary. It will display the allowed codes, but actually you can't do anything with these. I'm just going to emphasize, be careful with the inclusive, exclusive part of this. Okay, so, and then you can have your different color codes for what you need. Okay, so you can actually use those color codes in your assays, in your personalized tables. Basically everywhere you have a number, you can use color codes, numeric color codes. Okay, so again, you can give a default color and a default pattern. A lot of people put invisible as default pattern, so it doesn't show up. So for example, if I had something else, let's say I had 150, it would not show up. And then it would be invisible. Okay, so that's color codes. Personalized lists, really important. These personalized lists will be used in other places in the information table, but are also used for your intensity, what they call degree, like we mentioned before. It's also going to be used in all your personalized tables and things like this. So it's quite important. Okay, so you will create a new table, and then you will just add new field. Okay, and then it's quite simple. Okay, so and then you can just move up and down. Okay, I think this table already existed, so that's why. But you can just move up and down your different elements in here. Okay, I'm just going to emphasize something because I've had some problem with this before. Be careful. Abbreviation and name are the opposite of the dictionary. So you have name and abbreviation. It's just the opposite. I don't know why, but it's the opposite. So don't confuse the two if you're used to do the dictionary. So it's the opposite in here. Okay. Associated list. These are other fields in the information table that you can list to link to personalized list. So for example, the author, I have a list of loggers, so I'm just going to go and pick my personalized list of loggers and things like this. You can also, if you have a list for all the levels that you're using in your mind, you can just create a personalized list with all the level, and then you can have this in here. So again, this is just in the information, standard information in here. Author is the list of my loggers, and then you can just assign this in here. Okay, I'm not going to talk about coordinate system like I mentioned. However, I'm going to talk about the associated directories. These directories are created when you create your first database. And then you can modify the path if your photos are somewhere else. I'm just going to emphasize that Geotic uses this kind of format. And then, for example, if you go into photos, it's just organized in a way that Geotic can read the photos and display them in the description tab. Okay, so for example, in the photos, it is divided by project. Okay, so in this database, I have 2 projects, and within the projects, it's divided by survey. And then within the survey, in this case, it's a DDH, you will have the survey name, the from to, written down. And this is how Geotic recognized those photos. So it has to be in this format to be able to be recognized. Same thing with your split. It's the same name, but called underscore split. And so this is how, when you go into in here and you want to verify what is the photo, well, in this case, there's no photo in this drill hole. If you click on those buttons, this is how it fetch for the photos. Similarly, if you have certificates, it will also go into your sampling table, and then it will rename your certificate with a date, so you can have a look at it and so on. Unit and decimals. This is just the units that are used for the whole database, so it could be metric or imperial. If I'm changing this to imperial, it is not going to convert all my data, so don't try. It's just going to change the unit, but it's not going to convert everything from one to the other. And this is also independent of your coordinate system. So you can have a coordinate system that is in feet, for example, but have a database that is in metric. Okay, so this is completely independent of your coordinate system. Also here you have decimals for printing of intervals and angles, so how many decimals you want to have. And if you check this little box at the end, everywhere in Geotic, every time you have an angle, you will have this number of decimal. For example, in this case, 2. So every time you display an angle, it will be displaying 2 decimals. And every time you see an interval or like just a length, it's going to put 2 as well if you check this box. And that's it. And lastly, in this library part, you have the type of security. Okay, by default, it's at basic. You can switch that to satellite. So in satellite, it allows you to create satellite databases. Another webinar will be done on satellite databases later on. But if you put satellites databases, this one will become your master, and then you will be able to have multiple people working on your survey. And also you'll have to specify if your satellite database is going to be Access or SQL. This could be different from your master database. Okay. And the last option here, satellite and network. Satellite and network allows you to create satellite databases, but also it is not possible to have 2 people working in the same survey at the same time. Okay, so this is very useful in an Access database where Access was not designed to have multiple users. So if, for example, if you have this last option here, people won't be able to have 2 people, for example, one in lithology and one in RQD, describing the same drill hole at the same time. Okay, because this can cause different corruption, database structure, corruption, specifically in Access. If it does happen, it's not the end of the world. You can always go in here in utilities, and then you will just say compact DB. Okay, and that's pretty much it. All right, so that's it for the library. Like I said, a coordinate system, I've talked about it. Sampling will be talked in the next webinar probably. Let's move on directly to the user. It's not going to be taking too long, but I think it's important to set up users. A lot of people don't, and it's not a good idea. A lot of people just keep the normal admin, password, user, and password for Geotic. But we recommend having different users if you have a bigger team. So you can enter all your user and give them different permissions to play around in Geotic. Okay, I'm going to talk about permissions later on, but I'm just going to say that the users can be linked to your Windows authentication. So for example, let's say that we have Sedamour here in the office. I can modify it and say, okay, just use the window authentication instead of Geotic authentication. If you press a little checkbox here, it's going to look if this username exists in Windows, and if so, it will just write down the path, like the correct way of writing this. And then see, it is now a Windows authentication. So what happens is, if I'm logged, okay, for example, my name is Eric Arahi, I'm logged on Windows under my username. Okay, so you can see it at the bottom in here. When I'm starting GeoticLog, it's not asking me to put a username and password. It recognizes my Windows authentication and goes directly into Geotic. Okay, so using this, it's going to use directly what my permissions are. So I don't have to put a username and password. It's going to recognize the one from Windows directly. Okay, it's quite important. You can also create groups. So for example, in Geotic, we have several groups that exist. So group Geotic, group administrator, and things like this. So you can have this. So for example, in my case, I'm part of several groups. Okay, so if I go in here in Windows Security, I can see the different groups I belong to. So I have GR Geotic, GR Support, and all domain users. Okay, so these are the ones I'm using. So these groups can also be added in Geotic, so you can assign the permissions to the groups instead of the person. Okay, so you can say that the group Geotic is allowed to do everything, for example, or administrators are allowed to do everything. Group Geotic is not allowed to import certificates, for example. And because Eric Alahi is just part of group Geotic, well, he's not going to be able to import certificates in this case, okay? Because he's not the administrator. You can also create Geotic groups, and then you can create the different names and assign groups to those people. So you don't have to give this permissions person per person, but you can give it to a group. It saves a lot of time. You can go person to person to give them different permissions, but the group permissions are always overtaking the personal permissions. Okay, so the group permissions are actually the ones that are going to be used and not the individual ones. Okay, if for example, if I was part of several groups, okay, for example, here Christian is part of 5 different groups. Is in the admin group, Geotic groups. Well, okay, this is administrator, it's not admin, but these are cumulative. Okay, so for example, Geotic group Geotic does not allow to import certificate, but administrator does, because it's a Windows authentication, and he's part of these different groups. This is cumulative. So if he has rights in one of these ones, he's going to have right to do it in Geotic. Okay, so maybe he's not having right in this particular group, but he does in another one, then he's going to have the right to do it. Okay, because this is how Windows work. Okay, so it is quite important to demystify this. It's important to create groups, different users, different rights. Okay. And then once you have this set up, you can give the different rights either to the groups or to the person. Okay, so if it's not assigned to a group, for example, EA is not in a group, you can assign different permissions to that person. So every table in Geotic has permissions. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to go through the main ones. For example, if we go in general, okay, do you want this person to be able to manage accounts? So maybe if you leave that in modifications, that means I can modify everyone's account. So this is probably not a good idea. You want to give that probably just for the administrators to be able to do this. Okay. Do you want this person to be able to create a new database? Maybe you don't, because otherwise you might end up with several databases, and then you don't know which one is the best one, and you don't know which one is the latest one, and so on. So maybe you want to restrict this kind of things to the people. All right, so if you go to projects, maybe you don't want some people to be able to delete projects because an error can happen, and so on. Okay, so like I said, there's everything in Geotic has permissions and things to set up. Okay, so you could be, for example, doesn't have access to any of these information. It's only in read only, or does it have edit rights, modification rights to play on different things. Okay, so same thing for descriptions, personalized tables, all the tables that you're creating automatically, they're going to be found in here. So maybe you don't want to give access to some of the tables to people and things like this. All right, so you can also restrict the people that can create tables. You can also restrict the number of people that can import, export data. Maybe you don't want everyone to be able to import certificates in your database. Maybe it's a specific person that does that, so you can set this up to a group or a person, right? Utilities, same thing. Library, so maybe you don't want people to change all the libraries all the time, like because one geologist see a rocks and then just add codes all the time, then it's difficult to keep the homogeneity of your database if you add more and more and more and more codes, right? So you want to restrict what people can do. Printing, the way you can print. And the last one is security. In this one, this is where you set up passwords for everyone. Okay, except for Windows, because if you have Windows, it's going to be automatically your password from Windows. And this is also where you can secure the database. So securing the database means, well, this is set up in the in here. Okay, so you can secure the database just if it's an Access database. This just means that it cannot be open in Access. It's going to be open only in the Geotic suite. Okay, so GeoticLog, Mine, Graph, and things like this, but not elsewhere. So people cannot go and play in the background in the database, for example. Okay. So if you want to change your type of security and do you want some people to create or not satellite databases, so this is all set up in here. Okay, so I think that covers pretty much everything. It was quite dense. There's a lot of things to consider, little tricks here and there, but I think these are the main topics that you need to know. By the way, you can see by user directly if they have rights or not. So if it's a yellow, it's a read-only. If it's a red, you don't have access anywhere. Directly in the preview in here, if you click on the persons, so you can see directly in here, just a short form of it. Okay, so I suggest you use users. I think it's important just to keep your database clean, but it's always up to you. All right, so I think that's it for today. If you have any questions, I'm going to be ready to answer any of your questions. And don't forget, we're going to have more webinars. I think the next one is going to be about assays, so it's going to be quite important. It's probably going to be divided in two different webinars because there's quite a lot of material to cover. Yeah, so hopefully you learned something today. And if you have any questions, I'm here to hear your questions. Thanks.